Hi, this is Colin Sandberg from Backbone Performance. Welcome to my man cave. I'm here on a Monday afternoon, doing a little recovery ride on the rollers here, spinning the legs out after a fairly tough weekend. So, what else do I have to do? Thought I'd make a little video here. Some of you guys that have seen some of the stuff that I put on YouTube from a while ago realize I had some stuff from a ways back about power measurement, sort of beginner's guide, intermediate guide, never put it out in advanced guide, and certainly had a few people that were looking forward to that. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to sort of start over at the beginning because just have some new ways of explaining this stuff that might be helpful. So let's get started. Let's talk about different ways of measuring exertion. First of all, we have speed. Now, speed is ultimately what's most important. The rider to finish the course in the least amount of time is the winner of the race. So ultimately, it's the guy with the fastest average speed. It does matter. Speed you can look at as your supporting forces minus your opposing forces. So the supporting force is basically power, your power output. Of course, if you're going downhill, gravity's working for you. If you had a really severe tailwind, 30-mile-an-hour tailwind, might be actually pushing you along. If somebody was pushing you, you've got a motor in your bike. But for the most part, it's your power. That's the work you're putting in. Then you've got these forces working against you. Most of that on a flat road. If you're riding down a flat road, paved road, 85% of the resistance that you're trying to overcome is aerodynamic drag. Then you also have gravity, which is relatively minimal on a flat road, but as soon as the road pitches uphill, it starts to get more and more significant until, you know, quickly gets steep enough that becomes the majority of the resistance you're trying to overcome. Those are the two big ones, and then you also have the relatively minor opposing forces. You have rolling resistance, which is the friction of your tires on the ground. Flat paved road, or a paved road, well paved, that's going to be relatively insignificant. But of course, if you're riding off-road, that's extremely significant. Just think about riding down a paved road at 20 miles an hour, and then you jump off onto the grass and try to keep going 20 miles an hour. It's a lot more work. For mountain bikers, for cyclocross riders, this is really huge all the time. Then you have drivetrain resistance, which is the friction of everything in your drivetrain that's moving. So the chain, the bearings in your hub, in your bottom bracket, in your pedals, in your derailleur pulleys, all those moving parts. And if you have a clean chain, well lubed, that's usually pretty insignificant. But the second, like, the rain washes off all your lube, or if your bearings are shot or something, it becomes pretty significant, and it can change on the course. Anybody who's ever raced a cyclocross race on a muddy day knows how much harder it is to move along a bike that's caked in mud everywhere. So back to speed though. Speed is the sort of, oh, I forgot, sorry, one more opposing force is braking force. That is one that not a lot of people consider because it is sort of within your control. But anybody who over brakes too long, too hard, is adding opposing force, thereby making it more difficult on themselves to overcome that force. So speed is ultimately what is important, but cycling is an unusual endurance sport because all of those opposing forces are so variable, and really variable on a regular basis. If you're a runner, you might do a workout, and let's just say 4 by 800 meter intervals at your 10K pace. Well, you can look at that pace, which is, you know, another way of talking about speed, and do those intervals there. It's going to be relatively consistent. Versus if I did an equivalent bike workout, let's say I did an 8-mile time trial, and I averaged 24 miles per hour, which is 20 minutes for 8 miles. If I were to go do a workout and say 4 by 3 minutes at 24 miles per hour, well, that could be either really hard or really easy or anywhere in between, based on the conditions. If I'm like for example, just kind of throwing some numbers out there, 75 kilogram rider, for me to go 24 miles an hour uphill, up let's say 6% grade, that could be over 800 watts that I'm having to put out sustained to keep that pace. Versus if it's a flat ground, might be under 300. Just no wind, making a lot of assumptions here obviously. And then downhill it could literally be zero effort. You could just be coasting down the hill going 24 miles per hour. So it's a huge range, and I know if there's runners out there watching this, you're thinking, oh well, we have wind too, it matters. We do trail races, ups and downs, makes a huge difference. And that's true, but really we're talking about probably like 20 to 30% speed difference based on those variables. Whereas on the bike, like I said, it could be, you know, you add a little bit of uphill, or poor pavement, or wind, or whatever, and could be 3 times as much work, 4 times as much work, or it could be nothing, because cycling is a non-weight bearing sport. So you have to have an alternative if you're really wanting to measure how hard you're going, how much work you're doing. Keep in mind, when I say work, I am not talking about work in the physics sense. I'll talk about that later. So that's where we get to power. Power is real time, how hard you're working. Now, we usually measure power in watts on the bike, but really you could use any power units. You could use horsepower. You know, people talk about car horsepower. By the way, 1 horsepower is equivalent to 746 watts. Just a little random trivia there for you. There's 2 components of power we'll talk about on the bike. There's torque, which is angular force you're applying to the pedals. So how hard I'm pushing. And there's angular velocity, or RPM, how fast I'm spinning. So given relatively steady state conditions, I want to raise my power. I can pop it into bigger gear, keep the same RPM, my power goes up. Or I can keep it in the same gear, raise my RPM, power goes up. Really just two components there. Now, the other side of that is that I can generate the same power at, I can do 200 watts at 60 RPM, big gear. I can generate 200 watts at 120 RPM in a smaller gear. Different ratios of that torque versus RPM. First thing most people that get power meters notice is how much it bounces around. And you see here with my power, even steady state power, like I have no aerodynamic drag, and I'm indoors, so everything's pretty consistent. It bounces around a bit. If you're doing prescriptive intervals, if I'm trying to aim for a certain power training, indoors I'd say I usually shoot for 20 to 40 watts range because it's bouncing around. Outdoors, that could be 40 to 60 watt range that you're aiming for. Some people prefer to do a smoothing that they're looking at on their computer. 3-second rolling average, 5-second rolling average, whatever. You can even do 30-second rolling average on your computer, so it's not bouncing around so much. I just personally don't like to do that because I feel like I overcorrect when I see that, but it's really personal preference. It takes some getting used to, and you use whatever, you look at whatever you prefer to look at on your computer in real time. Now, I classify power into two main categories, power measurement. Prescriptive use, which is like, I'm going to aim for whatever power for this interval or this time, or descriptive use, which would be, I'm not necessarily looking at it, and by the way, I don't look at it all during the race, group ride, something like that, just sort of racing, doing the group ride, but afterwards I might look at it, and especially as a coach, this is really valuable. If somebody gets dropped in a race, you want to know why. Figure out why, and figure out what they need to work on. Whether it's a matter of efficiency, or they're just nerves maybe, bike handling, or it's just a matter that they can't do the power required to make the break, or to stay with the field or whatever. Figure that out, and everybody's a little bit different, figuring out what their limiters are. So those are the two main categories. That is it for now for this. I don't want to go too long with this video, but I'll explain some of these more complicated terms next time, and we'll get into it. But it's very important, even if you kind of know this stuff, to really understand the basics of what power is and why we use it. So if you have any questions, or you don't like the way I explain something, you want me to explain it a different way, let me know, and I'll get back to you soon. Thank you.